Carbon bikes are more popular than ever thanks to their costs gradually reducing, making them more accessible to more people. Modern carbon fibre frames are stronger and lighter than they've ever been. However, just like all bikes, they are still susceptible to damage through crashing or improper use. To find out more, I've come to see the guys at Carbon Bike Repair to see how they do things and then, crucially, to disprove a few myths about carbon fibre. Let's head inside and find out more. Carbon fibre is difficult to understand as a material for lots of us. Metal dents, bends and buckles. Carbon fibre reacts quite differently to stresses, and it also has unique properties when it comes to repairing. Ollie and I do our best to dispel some of the myths around carbon fibre, but sometimes it takes an industry expert to prove the point, and this is where Rob comes in, founder of Carbon Bike Repair.
I'm Rob. I own Carbon Bike Repair. We've had Carbon Bike Repair for about 11 years. I'm a qualified industrial designer, qualified in polymers and composites, and we're a one-stop shop carbon repair solution. We offer an assessment service here for all our customers where we understand what's happened to the bike. I mean, carbon fiber is an incredibly complicated material. It's not like in the old days where we had brazing and welding steel frames. We need high technology solutions for high technology manufacturing. So it's very important that the customer feels safe, that the services we provide is thorough, and that they get the right price, the right answer, and most importantly, a safe bike to ride at the end of the day.
Hey Rob, thanks for taking the time to speak to us today. We've come to see you to find more about carbon bike repair. So you're the experts in this, so it'd be great if you could guide us through some of the process of what you're doing here, and then obviously help us dispel some of those myths I've been talking about.
Sure, let's go.
Where are we going first?
Well, first off, we're going to go into the inspection room where we do health checks. So let's have a look.
Shall we do it?
Yep.
Come on. So Rob, this is presumably a frame that's in to be assessed by you guys. I mean, I'm obviously no expert, but I can already see there's some damage on the down tube here. Yep. So what is it you guys would be looking at and assessing here?
Well, you're quite right. I mean, that is an obvious fracture.
Yeah.
In many cases, customers think this bike could be binned, it should be binned, but you know, it's fully repairable. There's no mid-tube fractures are very, very easy to repair. So the first thing we need to understand in this space is to understand why that happened and the residual damage that could have occurred as a result of that.
It's not obvious always, isn't it? Because for me, obviously, I would just go, oh, this part here is broken, we better repair that. But You're taking it another level and going, well, because this area has been compromised, we need to look at other areas to make sure they're still structurally okay. Correct.
For an example, we forget the weight of a cyclist when they either hit by a car or hit something that they attach to the saddle. Yeah. So the saddle is then pulled forward as a result of this incident. We need to check the seat tube, for example. Mm-hmm. So you find interesting cracks and fractures under microscope by understanding where the forces come from in a case like this.
Okay, so then this bike, for example, will be assessed, and then presumably you'll contact the customer, let them know the outcome and what their different options are.
Correct.
So once they've decided that, you could presumably then move on to your next stop where you start to begin the repair process, is that right?
That's right. So once we've assessed this and the customer is happy to go ahead, they can choose to have the bike completely paint restored, graphic restored, so the problem goes away, or they don't care much about that, and we can do a block spray, which is a much cheaper solution in the end, but they will get a bike back that is 100% safe and QC'd.
So I'm intrigued to find out a little bit more about what's going on in here, because we've got some cool looking stuff, and we've got a couple of different options here, haven't we?
We certainly do.
Yeah.
When bikes come in, they're not always broken. Yeah. So if they need restoration work, so for example, it's a scratch and not a fracture, the bike goes into restoration, or we go into the carbon room where the actual repair work takes place.
Because like you said, some things are cosmetic, aren't they? So it could just be that you've got a scratch on your bike, and it is fortunate enough that it's just the paintwork, not structural. Yeah. So that's a really good point to make, because you're dealing with both the cosmetic side and the structural bit.
Yeah.
So there's a load of really cool looking stuff in there. Can we head in?
Yeah, let's go in.
You lead the way. So Rob, this is a repair station, is it? I can see you've got a bike here in repair, and I can see you've got some carbon fibre here. But I already know lots of different carbon fibre bikes are made using different, I suppose, types of carbon fibre, aren't they? But what are the different ones you got? Because we've got a few examples here. So what do you guys do?
Well, we have plain weave carbon, which is used on the internal structures of a tube. Plain weave means 90-degree angles, and they use what they call 3K carbon, which is 3,000 strands per toe, and a toe is literally a string of carbon.
Oh, I see, yeah.
So that seems to be the one that the manufacturers use the most. Some of the older bikes use the plain weave a lot more, but then we got into the clever stuff. Which is the Ooyy, which means one-directional carbon fiber. And this stuff is amazing because this is what makes carbon bikes so fantastic, is that they can design the details of the characteristics into a bike by using carbon fiber that is laid up in a straight fashion across if you want the bike to flex this way. And if you want to lock down that movement, you lay it this way, or you lay it 45 degrees. And the amount of layers you apply per tube or per section of the bike will determine the characteristic of the bike, whether it's compliant, stiff compliant. You've got rider fatigue, which is one of the key motivations for manufacturers these days in the seat tube area, for example, where the cyclist was almost the last part of the picture. Fatigue on a cyclist is no good if he's going to win races over a long period of time. So make his life comfortable. Make sure his saddle isn't the only thing that's going to keep him comfortable. So carbon fiber designers do a lot in using Ooyy carbon, but that doesn't negate the fact that they still use plain weave on certain areas like the bottom bracket area for stiffness.
So manufacturers will use different materials in different places, and then you're carefully and, well, quite cleverly using the correct materials to recreate what the manufacturers have done?
We pretty much have to go, as we're fortunate enough to be able to grind into that carbon so we can see what's happened underneath the surface. We've done enough of these bikes now to know what to expect with that particular bike. So we will then apply what we know from what we find in that area and replace that carbon the way it was. It's a very important point to make that we reconstitute the carbon rather than repair, because repair, it's assuming that you've put glue in between something. So that would be a repair. But when you rebond carbon, you rebind the fibers back together again, you reconstitute. It's a little bit like wool. If you pull a piece of wool apart and you unwind it and you weave it back again, it's not repaired, it's just
reconstituted.
Yes.
So
maybe
you couldn't really call yourself carbon bike reconstitution, could you?
Yeah, that would go down.
It doesn't roll off the tongue as well, does it?
No.
So something else that I've spotted here is that this is actually a moulded part on the frame here. I know this is a mountain bike, but the principles remain the same. So how do you recreate these sort of unique shapes?
Well, there are different ways they manufacture the carbon bike. In most cases, a loosely term for manufacturing a bike would be to blow mold it. So the internal bladders compress the carbon out towards the edges of the mold, which creates the hollow tube. But there are areas like dropout areas, mostly on road bikes, not so much on mountain bikes where they are laminates, where we use a high compression injection molded carbon fiber, which is very, very strong and can handle compression from skewers and clamps and things like that, where we have to recreate those. We have to remold them, otherwise they just don't work the way they're supposed to. Dropouts are particularly problematic in that area since they started to make dropouts out of carbon fiber, not alloy. There's some benefits to it, but there's also some bad sides to it. So it's very important that when you have a bike repaired that you replace the material that was there before.
Because it's all about keeping the bike as safe as possible, isn't it?
It is, and also bikes are finely tuned machines. If you repair a bike in one area that's stronger than the other, you're starting to put pressure on the other side. So it's a symmetry between the two stays, for example, that you make sure that the wall thicknesses and the consistency of the material is exactly the same. Otherwise, the ride characteristics will not be the same.
So that's a really good point. So carbon repaired bikes are just as safe as they were in the first instance.
They should be if they're done properly.
So after this stage, where does the bike then head to?
Once the bike is done, depending on what the customer wants, they can have the bike completely restored back so that problem goes away. Others, it could be a cost issue. We will then apply a block spray, which protects the repair, and some choose to spray them themselves. They just want the bike back.
So
maybe they want
paint,
to check.
So that paint is for the purpose of protecting the repair rather than making it look how the bike originally would.
Yes, because
that's
you get
cheaper.
Exactly, because if you get ingress in between where the repair is and the paint, it starts to eat away at the paintwork. The carbon is impervious to that.
Yeah.
It's not affected by things like that. But it's nice to be able to give back a bike that's finished off as best we can for the price that they pay.
Perfect. Cool. Let's head across and see where some of those paint repairs are done.
I'll show you.
Thanks.
So we come out of the carbon room into the restoration area where we deal with the last part of the bike, which is to finish it off aesthetically as possible. So as you can see, it's a fairly complicated area. There's a ton of brands, ton of colors, graphics, you name it.
So you're getting the bike finished perfectly how it was when the customer presumably had it before it got damaged.
Yes. I mean, if you think of an insurance company claim, the customer's going to be really fussy about what he gets because he really wants a new bike back. But if the bike is repairable or the scratch needs to be fixed, there's no reason to throw that bike away.
So I've got a really good question for you actually, seeing as we've come to the area where you paint stuff, is how does the UV light affect carbon fibre bikes? Because this is a question we are asked so many times over and over, and the answer I've always given is they're not drastically affected, but that's about as in-depth as I can give an answer for that. So, tell us, how does the UV light affect a carbon fibre bike?
You're right, Alex. I mean, UV light plays a small role in all the things that can affect a carbon bike. But carbon bikes are very fragile. Let's get that out of the way. But UV light will affect things like the paint. Already the manufacturers use a UV stabilized filter in their final lacquer, which they apply to the bike, but it still does affect, I'm sure you've had problems where your bike has changed color over time and leaving
if you leave it in the sun, I guess, for a prolonged period of time, it starts to sort of dull the paint a little bit. But structurally, does that have a big impact on it?
No. I mean, it'd be 100 years before anything happens to your bike, but don't hold me to it. But generally, no, it would hit the surface and affect more than anything the resin that sits on the surface, the gel coat that's left after it's left the mold. But it's probably more dangerous to lean your bike up against a heater than it is for UV. So heat affects carbon
be
much more than
more
UV.
Concerned over heat than UV.
Absolutely.
So I guess also there isn't a standardised repair time, is there? Because I presume every single bike and repair you see is slightly different to the next one.
Exactly.
There is never the same bike and repair to be done again.
Each manufacturer has their goal bike and their dream bike to produce, and with their best colour offering they can supply their customers with, and we end up with having to solve that problem. We do get a lot of support from the brands, which is quite surprising, but then that would be the case if you have bikes that are made abroad and it's much more expensive for them to get the bike shipped back just to fix a little nick. The local dealers are finding that we're very useful, but we must be able to do it exactly the way they want, otherwise there's no point.
You're all about getting the fine details, right?
Fine details is what the customer expects.
God, what have we got up here? There's so many frames everywhere.
There are. I mean, this is our graveyard of bikes, modern, old, anything that's broken that we've been asked not to repair for whatever reason. The benefits of this is that we're able to work on some of the most modern bikes for our training purposes, so that our customers feel safe that we're actually working on current bikes. And I mean, for example, this S-Works is a pretty up-to-date bike, and that's been repaired on the back. It's fully rideable, but it's given our guys a real insight into how these bikes are made that allow us to be able to, with conviction, be able to repair bikes, or indeed write bikes off when we don't feel it's safe to repair.
So this is our final QC process that you come to, is it? And this is once everything's done, finished, and it's one of the final checks that you do.
Yes. Here's a typical example of a top tube. So the ticket will say drive side top tube fracture, so that would have been there. And as you can see, it's clear.
Shiny
and you've got to see it under different light. It's already been QC'd before, but you just never know. We still pick up occasional things, little marks or masking that's not quite 100% right, which has to go back and...
So this is sort of cosmetic QC.
This is cosmetic.
But before that, you do a structural QC as well, don't you?
Of course, yes. It's a very important part of what we do in order to confirm that a bike which we can't test to destruction is tested to a point at which it would normally go beyond that point.
Yeah. That's a real key process because, like you said earlier, safety is like your main concern here, is to make sure the customer has got a perfectly safe bike. And it's one of the main reasons of what I wanted to clear up today, is that carbon fibre repaired bikes are perfectly safe if they're done correctly, aren't they?
They are.
So final stage of the process is get the bike built up, ready to be shipped back out to the customer. That's right?
That's right, yep. Customers must understand that if they want their bike repaired here, resprayed, they can also get them built up. We understand how these bikes, particularly with resprays or custom resprays, where and how to assemble these bikes so they don't get damaged out there.
So presumably, it would actually be really helpful if the manufacturers knew a little bit about some of your process, because you're seeing so many different damages and different problems with bikes, aren't you?
Yeah, it is comforting to see a lot more communication from bike manufacturers about certain aspects of their new builds, for example, and how to avoid huge warranty problems with those. And you know, we're there to help. We're there to help everyone.
So manufacturers are in contact with you, are they, directly to try and find out more information about how they can further improve their own bikes to make better bikes for everyone to ride?
Exactly. Wall thicknesses, how, you know, what is a useful amount of carbon to put? Could we put more in this area? Particularly with things like punctures, which happen to a lot of down tubes, for example, where stress testing does one thing, but when you got real life problems, we see those things coming in here all day long. Yeah. Alarm bells start to go off and you think, wow, I wish that manufacturer would contact me, because I could just tell him, you know, this is what we're seeing and this is how you could maybe rectify it in the next load. So without trying to sound like a smart aleck, we are part of the process of the ownership of a bike.
That's really important to get across, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
And it's another good point about carbon fibre, is that it's a process, it evolves, you're working with manufacturers, they're constantly evolving what they do, and so do you guys.
Exactly.
That's really cool. Yeah. Nice, thanks. So there you have it. Carbon fibre bikes are perfectly safe to be repaired in almost all instances. And if anything, it's better for the environment. It's been pretty cool to see the technology and the process behind it. And if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up and let me know down in the comments section below what you think of carbon fibre repair. See you later.